The top of the morning to you lads, I am the Drink Pro and today we're drinking Irish whiskey in honor of St. Paddy's Day. What's up everybody, Kyle the Drink Pro here with you yet again. Yes, that was in fact an offensive Irish stereotype. I'm trying to get canceled in 2021, we'll see how it goes. I've got three wonderful, unique, and different Irish whiskeys in front of us today. And I really wanted to make a video that sort of highlighted some of the unique things coming out of Ireland. St. Patrick's Day is coming around the corner, and a lot of people are gonna just be getting shithouse wasted on Jameson. I want to offer an alternative with some unique pours, some tasty pours, and something that might be a little outside of your comfort zone. So what I'm doing today is kind of the opposite of the rye video. I'll put that up here in the corner. But that was sort of a beginner's introduction to rye. This is kind of the opposite. This is, you already are drinking whiskey, you know what Irish whiskey is, what else is out there? I think I'm out of focus. I'll give you sort of a preliminary thought. If you want something in your comfort zone, get Redbreast 12. I think that's super in the comfort zone, right in the lane of like classic bourbon drinkers Irish whiskey. These are gonna be a little bit more adventurous, and I'll explain why as we go through them. Ireland is often cited as the birthplace of whiskey, and in fact, the first written record we have of Irish whiskey comes from 1405, when somebody overindulged and died on Christmas by drinking too much aquavitae. In true Irish fashion, instead of mourning to death, in the writing, they then make a joke about it not being aquavitae, but being aqua mortis. It's not the water of life, it is the water of death. Coincidentally, or maybe not so coincidentally, St. Patrick's Day actually is an honoring of the death of St. Patrick, who is the patron saint of Ireland. But I'm not going to get into the history of whiskey in general or Irish whiskey. I'm not here to get into the history of St. Patrick's Day. I know you guys want to drink whiskey. That's why you're thinking about St. Patrick's Day, so let's start drinking and let's talk about what we're drinking. First off, big shout out to Yolanda for making this last year. I think it's crocheted, but I'm not really up to speed on my formed fabric styles. But it's a 4-leaf clover. Luck of the Irish. So we're gonna start today with Method and Madness. Now, Method and Madness is actually a Middleton product, which is a huge distillery. It's just gigantic. It's one of the biggest in the world. Certainly one of the biggest in Ireland. By the way, drinkpro.com for these glasswares. But the cool thing about Method and Madness is that it's actually an experimental distillery within Middleton. They have their own still, they have their own aging area, they have all of their own processes. And it's a place where you can really make experimental whiskey. And that's really cool. You know, Middleton is big enough and established enough, they don't have to innovate. They really don't. But they're choosing to create an entire area within their distillery on their campus. It's actually its own distillery that's dedicated to making new innovative whiskey. I freaking love that. I think that's a great idea. So this Method and Madness particular batch that I've got is a single grain Irish whiskey. It's matured in bourbon barrels and it's finished in virgin Spanish oak. I think I've reviewed this at least one other time on the channel, so I'm not gonna spend a lot of time with it. Really, for me here, it's a comparison point for these other two whiskeys, but I'll give you some quick notes just to set the stage. Well, right off the bat on the nose of this whiskey, you actually get this very light wood. It's very bright and sharp, almost like maybe sandalwood or pencils. I think they put pencils as the note on the back of the bottle. It has this really high, bright, light note to it. And that's not that surprising. A lot of what goes into this, it's a single grain whiskey. It's using these virgin bourbon barrels. It's only being finished, I think, in virgin Spanish oak. Yeah, it's finished in virgin Spanish oak. So all the elements of this should give you some light, bright, oaky flavor. This thing is very much, though, light and grainy. It's interesting because you get that very distinct woody note, but it's not a deep oak. It's very light and bright. It's like pencils and balsa wood or something like that. But then it's accompanied by this really sweet, I would say like honey or malt extract. It's very, very sharply sweet. There is a little bit of this almost metallic note. You do get some of the metal that often for me is a consistent note in a lot of Irish whiskeys. I said a metallic initially, but the more I smell it, it's almost like an eraser, like you've rubbed an eraser really hard on a piece of paper. And that's kind of what I'm smelling on this. All right, let's taste it real quick. Very sweet. Again, I get very light. The honey notes are pretty prominent. I get like a fruitcake quality almost. These golden raisin component that's really delicious. I'm getting kind of lazy. They just have notes on the back of this. And I do think that they note fresh rain on pine. I don't get that at all on the nose. That petrichor is just not showing up for me. I do get the light rose petal though, which is a reference note. They say fresh peeled grapefruit, warm toasted oak, and zesty spices on the palate. I don't know if I agree with that. I definitely get fruit, but I get more like stewed pears and the golden raisins I referenced. The finish has sort of a slight herbal note, which I think they also reference. They do, yeah, they talk about clove and mint and sweet cereal in the finish. Now the finish, I kind of agree with, that's pretty spot on. It's always a little difficult when a whiskey gives you tasting notes like that because it takes away my incentive to be more creative. I just want to reference the notes and see if I agree or not. But that's just a reference point as far as I'm concerned because I've already reviewed that whiskey in the past. But now we're gonna jump into some things I've never tried. Now in this glass is Waterford 1.1 Rathclogh. Now, if you haven't heard about Waterford, that's fine. They're an up-and-comer, but man, they are doing some really cool things. I really like the way that they're approaching whiskey because they're being as transparent as humanly possible and almost painstakingly attached to process. That's really great because it makes things replicable. You can understand what you're doing and how you're doing it and figure out how to change things. So they keep track of every pour, they keep track of all the wood, they keep track of where they're getting their malt grain, and they actually tell you which farm each batch is coming from. So the Rathclogh, I believe, comes from one farm. Got the GPS coordinates here, I won't read them out loud, but it's from Irina 2015 barley, 1,414 days on oak. And they also break down the different casks that this went into for the aging process. Now, I don't have this in front of me, I can probably look it up, but I just assume that they're aging it in these casks separately and then blending them. 35% of this whiskey was American refill, 20% was first fill American cask, which is actually second fill. They take American whiskey, they dump it out, and then the first fill is actually the second fill of the cask, but it's the first fill that isn't the American whiskey. 25% of the casks are French oak, and 20% are Vin du Natural. Now, I know I'm not saying that right, but essentially, it is a sweet French dessert wine. So we should get a little bit of dessertiness on this. Now, 1,414 days is not that long, and you can see it's a relatively light color, but you can definitely smell that dessert wine, that sweetness, it's almost a cakiness. I mean, the dessert wine really comes through on this. I'm getting like a deep, sweet grape, maybe like a raspberry puree or a syrup. I almost get a pie note. Like it really kind of smells like a raspberry or a strawberry pie to me. This thing is just a fruit bomb. I'm getting apricots, pears, tangerines. The nose is just a gorgeous bouquet of fruit. But it doesn't shy away from that grain. The youth still shows up. You can smell the maltiness. And I was getting sort of that pie crust vibe from it initially. But I'm also getting like a lemon zest note as well. I think the only effect of the wood that I can smell is this sort of mustiness. I think that's really cool, but it's pretty background. Now, two things before I taste the Waterford. First off, thank you to the anonymous donor who gave it to me. When I have an anonymous donor, I get to run this beautiful footage. Makes me smile every time. And the second thing I wanted to mention now before I taste this is that Waterford is using something called the terroir code. I'm probably not saying that right, but essentially they're putting a tracking number on the back of every bottle and that you can go to their website and learn a lot more information about the farm that it's made at, about the process that was used to make that whiskey. They are, like I said, obsessed with process and understanding every element of what's going into these whiskeys and transparency for the consumer, which I'm a big fan of. I love transparency, I'm a sucker for it. So shout out to Waterford for doing that. I haven't heard great things about their whiskey, to be quite honest with you, but I'm going to judge for myself. The nose on this is fantastic. Let's taste it. Very light, very grain forward. Ooh, the finish. I get this sort of like charred wood finish. It's almost smoky, but not like peaty at all. Just like a hint of charred barrel, really. Oh, and there's sort of an unpleasant grain, like husk flavor in my mouth on the finish. This is very, very young. I mean, 1,414 days is not young in American whiskey, but in Irish whiskey, it's a little bit young. I think the effect of the wine barrels adds some of that sweet grapiness to it. It definitely has dessert wine vibes, but otherwise it's kind of sharp. It's very, very focused on that sort of sweet, sharp grain note. It's like lemon, like the meat of the lemon. It's just very young. It's got a lot of that new makey quality. I feel like what Waterford's doing is gonna have wonderful results, but they shouldn't have released this yet. They just shouldn't have. This needed like 4 more years in a barrel. Now, before you go throw in Waterford out the back door, I know they have other versions. This is just one type of Waterford. And like I said, each one, they give you tons of information about where it's made, how it's made, what barley is used, which farm it was grown on, what processes, what age, everything. So although this is not my preferred pour, I'm not gonna be, afraid of trying other Waterfords. I'm not gonna shy away from digging into Waterford because I am so impressed with their process. And I do think that although this tastes very young and it has some really flaws that are hard for me to, sell you on a bottle of it, it's got so much good going for it that I expect great things from them in a couple of years. So cheers to Waterford for where they're going. You're not there yet, but I look forward to seeing where you end up. Oh, and weirdly, the Waterford really drew out that plasticine note out of the Method and Madness. I didn't get any kind of chemical-y vibes or plastic vibes from the Method and Madness on the initial taste, but after tasting the Waterford, it really shows up. I think that dessert wine really had an effect. And honestly, it's really the finish. Like, if you like a sweet grain-forward whiskey, it's not bad, but there's something that goes on in the finish that just really turns me off to the Waterford. Now, I focused on transparency a lot with both Method and Madness and with this Waterford. Both of them are working on giving you a lot of information about what they're doing. They're trying new things. They're pushing the boundaries. I don't really think that's what's happening with Blackadder. This bottle looks terrible. This label is terrible, Blackadder. I'm sorry, it's a terrible label. I don't know what you're trying to evoke with this, but it looks like it should not cost the $100 I paid for it. It looks cheap as hell. So get better graphic designers, please, because all I've heard is amazing things about your product. The other component of this is that they are not being at all transparent. There's no age statement on this bottle. There's no telling me who actually distilled the stuff. I know it's bottled in Scotland, but it's Irish whiskey. And I have no idea who's distilling it, or who's aging it, or where any of that's being done. Now, thankfully, I do know they're non-chill filtering it, there's no caramel coloring added, and it's being barreled at cask strength. So I applaud you guys for doing that. If you're going to do something where you give me no transparency, at least make it the purest, rawest product that you possibly can. And I will say, I know Blackadder has made some raw cask bottlings where they don't even filter it at all. You get little hunks of the char in the bottling, and I think that's pretty cool. I'm a sucker for shit like that. But let's see how this compares to some of these other pours. Now, like I said, I think this is the most expensive pour in the lineup, although not by a lot. Those Waterfords, in part because the process is so extensive, are rather expensive. But like I said, I think when you're buying something like that, you're supporting their process at this point. Now, according to this label, this bottle was imported in Las Vegas by Glass Revolution. Like I said, it's bottled in Scotland. I have no idea where it's being distilled. 59.6% alcohol, bottled July 2018, 103 of 333. Let's give it a shot. Oh, God, the nose on this is just incredible, though. So this is the first one I've really smelled some of that baking spice on. Like, this gives me a deep, sweet caramel, and some cinnamon, and some ginger, maybe even a little allspice. And some fennel. There's a hint of fennel on this, just a hint. And the fruits on this are much deeper and refined and sort of condensed down, like plum jelly. Prunes are coming through now, and the fruit cake is coming through. Almost a rum-like deep sugar, like the molasses. I started with caramel, and now it's becoming almost molasses. Just a beautiful nose on this one, just gorgeous. Okay, let's give this a taste. I can't wait any longer on this. Oh my gosh, the finish on this. Wow. This is such a weird whiskey. It's like the tale of two cities here. Like, it starts off super fruity and light and delightful. And even on the initial taste, you get a lot of those components. And then it just turns on you and just becomes super peaty and earthy and smoky. Just like you're drying meat over a campfire. The crazy thing is, going back to the nose, it still has that beautiful sweet baking spice component. Like, it does smell a little bit peated after tasting it. I'm sort of like ready for it. But it's very subtle. It still stays pretty firmly into that like cooked food quality. Like maybe you're eating some pie by a campfire or something, but it's pretty subtle. But when I taste it, man, it switches so fast. I want to give you some notes before the switch because I'm having trouble doing that. It's light. It's sweet. Oh, there it goes. Man, whatever like light, sweet, almost caramel, almost honey notes that you're getting at the beginning, which are very kind of standard Irish whiskey notes. It blows those away. And then I get like this charred oak, like spent fireworks. It's almost sulfury, a little bit of rubber. And there's like a mossy bogginess to this. This is so interesting. It really lives in the living peat world. You get this scene in your mind where you're like burning wood by a bog. It's just crazy. Or burning trash by a bog maybe because of that pretty noticeable, although still kind of subtle plastic note, but a rubber note maybe. That's probably more accurate. It's not really plastic, it's more rubber. If you like peated Scotch, this is a great place to go. This is an incredible Irish whiskey. I'm a sucker for peated Scotch, but you kind of have to put yourself in a different mind space. Like, this is not gonna taste like these other pours. This is not Redbreast 12. This is not Method of Madness or Waterford. This is doing something different, and I love that. And I think it's fantastic. If you like anything peated, check this thing out because it's so cool. It's a masterclass on like clear, crisp, obvious peat without being, you know, altered in any way. It just seems like it hits you in the face. Like going back to the Waterford after that, it just tastes like straight up grain. And going back to the Method of Madness, it's almost like this slightly plasticky candy. I mean, this is a fun experiment, you know, and I hope you guys will consider trying out one or any of these pours. Like I said, though, these are kind of advanced flavors. I mean, everything I listed might sound unpleasant to some of you, to be honest, but if you want the sort of standard classic, get like, you know, I don't know, green spot or yellow spot or Redbreast 12. I really like Redbreast 15 as well, but 12 is cheaper and it's very much in the butter zone of bourbon. There are very standard classic offerings in the Irish whiskey world, but this is some stuff that takes you to the next level. Highly recommend you check it out. And in the meantime, well, these are all finished almost. I am going to finish up my Method of Madness. You all celebrate St. Patrick's Day responsibly and enjoy the luck of the Irish. Cheers.